Hello and welcome to the Frog Bros podcast. My name is Justin, and tonight I have a very special guest, well known for the interdimensional Crossrip and longtime operator of Proton charging, Mr. Chris Stewart. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I appreciate you taking time out. I know you guys used to be so regular on the show, and with your show, we've kind of missed you there. You know, it's nice to hear your guys' voices back there recently, doing a little bit of, of chatting there. So
well, and we enjoyed it too. I mean, circumstances haven't really changed. That we're like, and let's get back to the weeklies. We can't do that yet, but when we over a year ago or whatever, when we discussed it, we kind of agreed let's just leave the door open rather than shut it down hard, and that was the first time we took advantage of that, and pretty much confirmed that we can continue, just leave it open. I mean, even if there was a pressure to get back to it, life happens and we're kind of busy with other things, but who knows, that could all change.
So jumping back into it, you guys have been able to come back and record that episode here and there, and it's it was great to hear your voices, and so you guys are still passionate about it. I think a lot of folks really loved having you in their weekly feed, so hopefully you guys can sporadically throw those out. There's a little treat for everybody out there.
Yeah, well, definitely, if the big a big enough event happens. This time was, I know part of it was I guess maybe the new movie. Was it the new movie? No, that wasn't it. God, I'm so old I can't even remember what we talked about. I know one was Troy's, because he had banked one with Jen about her cookbook, and so that was about to come out. So that timing, and it just by accident ended up that around that time something. I have to go back and look now, figure out
absolutely
what it was. But it just turned out to be the Jen one, and then we did another one in general, and then we did maybe it was just Afterlife. Maybe it was a conversation like this where we were like, it's been a year that we were off air, but we hadn't talked about the movie. That might have been it, now that I think about it.
Probably.
And then
so.
Halloween showed up, and couldn't skip that. I like doing my little mixtapes every year, and
it's a great little tradition there for all of us to enjoy. So speaking of Afterlife, so it's been about a year now. Now I'd say I was pretty critical of it when it first came out, just because, a diehard fan, but I've made it a point to watch it, usually probably at least once a month. Sometimes I'll watch it more than that, just kind of throw it on the background while I'm doing other things like I do with the original.
Right.
And I've grown to love it in a way that I didn't originally. I mean, I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was right up there with Ghostbusters 2 as far as quality goes and those types of things. And, when I really remove myself as a hardcore Ghostbusters fan from that, and I try to, take that hat off and put it on the shelf, and just pick up, the average moviegoer hat and kind of put myself in their shoes. I think that's really what makes the movie special, is when you kind of remove yourself from everything you know about this franchise. So,
yeah, I mean, the more you invest in something, the more likely you are to kind of, it'll crush your expectations just because you have expectations. That's the thing about Ghostbusters for all of us, is I've yet to meet anybody that was introduced to Ghostbusters by somebody telling them, it's this really great movie, you got to see it, and then becomes a hardcore fan, like almost to a T. Most of us were either kids when we saw it, and we'll consume anything, or we had no expectations going into it as well. So it's kind of the same thing here. Yeah, we all went in as super fans, and I mean, I've been trying to shed myself of that for years. I'm not even sure if this is recording properly, to be honest. Just in general too, like, I mean, the more we were all online and the more people were it just seemed like everybody felt like they had to have an opinion about what they saw, or at least have an opinion right away. And I was kind of like, it never used to be that way, right? We used to have gut reactions to it, and then we stew over it for ages, and then come to an internal consensus later on. And now it was just a rush to, who, you know, everything about it, right? Did you see all the
Mhm.
Easter eggs? Did you understand this? Did you understand? Like, it was just, I was like, that's too fast. That's way too. I've talked about it, so with some other people too. I've only watched it. I saw it 3 times around the time it was out in theaters, and then I think I saw it bits and pieces over, the year. Like I just tuned in for a bit, or I wanted to check something, and then in the last month or so, I sat down and watched it all over again, and yeah, I felt that was probably I've enjoyed that a lot more, just because I watched it. I kind of had my gut reactions to it, and then I had a year just to kind of be semi-removed from it before I revisited it. So, yeah, but I mean, if you're looking for my take on it too, I wasn't that critical of it when it came out, just because I think I didn't go in with any expectations. I guess they're technically expectations, but I think it's more accurate to call them. I went in with understandings, like this
Yeah.
was always going to be a movie that was just years and decades that people were waiting for it, and it was always going to be tricky because Harold Ramis was gone, and it was a bit of an unknown because Jason was going to be helming it and not his dad, and all these things was like, well, there's a lot going on right now, so let's just put a trust in the whole process and see what they came up with, sort of thing, which I think helped a lot as well. Because I mean, there's some stuff, if I stop and kind of ponder it, for like if I put on my film critique hat and all that, there's some real quirks to it, but I don't necessarily think that they were errors. I think they were just did the best they could, sort of thing. Like,
Yeah. I definitely feel that there. Like I said, for me, it's removing yourself from the super fandom and just letting that movie shine to be what it is. And I'm a huge fan of Jason Reitman's films on their own, right? I love Thank You for Smoking. It's just one of my favorite outright
yeah,
modern comedies. And I didn't even know it was Jason Reitman that directed that till years later after I saw it in theaters. So going back to that and hearing that and revisiting his catalog, I knew there was going to be a lot of heart to the story, which clearly we got. So
yeah,
I think for me, it was the nitpicking and assuming he was at the detail that we were, which, in very many ways he was.
mm-hmm.
And then just for me, like the unanswered questions, but at the same time, I guess that's part of the fun of it, right? There's so many other forms of media you can answer those in if you deem it necessary.
Yeah, partly. And I also think, um, I mean, it became very, very clear in the last few years, and particularly when around the time, just prior to Ivan passing, and then after he passed, that what he had spent the last 5 years working on was a legacy plan for Ghostbusters.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just recognizing, like, we can't read into it. We don't know if he knew what his health was like, or if he was already like starting to, you know, see signs of anything, or if he just recognized that he was, getting up there in years or whatever. But he had a plan, and when people do plans like that, and the same probably goes for Jason. Jason's a smart filmmaker and wrote the story. So in those two situations, I think the unanswered questions were deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think there's nothing wrong with people leaving a theater wanting more, because in this case, what they wanted 100% was for Sony to turn around and say, people want more, make another one. So, and that's ultimately, I mean, Jason basically all but admitted to that. He's like, yeah, the next one's in New York, but it continues the Spengler family story, which is, without giving us any details, is a good indicator all the stuff that we were left wondering about when it came to Egon and how he happened to have this family and all that sort of thing. Well, guess what? There's another movie coming, and we're probably going to get to hear about that sort of thing. I think this one will probably wrap that up. I think that's my guess, but you never know.
I would say that's a fair assumption, really. I mean, just knowing that we lost Ivan, and I think now that he was able to make that last movie with his father. I think Jason's really going to do something special, and I think we're all going to be pleasantly surprised when we see where he goes with this, because he's very thoughtful about his process with this, and I don't think he's going to do anything that would sideline this. They're very deliberate about trying to rebuild this brand and kind of making it the next big thing,
Yeah.
as far as giving it that. And I think Ivan really recognized the fact that they were just never able to do everything with it in the 90s like they would have wanted to, which Bill kind of tied things up. But at the same time, you look at some similar 90s movies and you say, okay, had we had a Ghostbusters 3 in that vein, would that have doomed the franchise then, right? And
Yeah.
so, and I think with some of the special effects, the over reliance there, one of the movies in the 90s may not have been what we would have wanted. So I'm almost grateful that we got to wait this long and really to let it carry on to another generation, because
Yeah.
my kids know what Ghostbusters is now, and I'm part of the Midland Empire Ghostbusters here in the Kansas City area, and in our group chat, I think we've got some 80 odd some members here of people that have some level of
Wow.
Ghostbusters cosplay that are just casually interested. Now we got a pretty reserved group of like the people that try to do every event, but that's a lot of people that are willing to come out and do something for
Yeah.
the community there, and that love this brand. And they're of all ages, basically from kids that watched it growing up with their family to anybody else. But I think it's one of those movies that captures your imagination as a kid, and I feel like that Afterlife was able to kind of throw some of that out there and really capture your imagination, because when they said they sat down to write this movie and they were playing with the toys, I could see myself doing that for something that I was passionate about like that, right?
Yeah.
If I had the opportunity to do that, it'd be like, okay, let's set this stage up and see what this looks like. What does this feel like when we do it this way? And just really putting yourself in an emotional spot where you're really carefree, right? Because as a young kid, you're for the most part carefree, right? Everyone's got traumas and things like that. But I think really for the most part, you have that innocent perspective on life where you can really just be creative. And I
Yeah.
think lots of adults lose that ability to be creative, and it's so fun to see everyone's take on it. And I guess that's one of the things that's always drawn me into the fandom over the years, is just how creative people are, even when things weren't super exciting, from fan films to pack builds to cosplay to just the art that you see out there. Go to a
Yeah.
Comic-Con and see the amazing art that people put into this franchise just because they love it.
Exactly. Yeah. I yeah, it's an interesting point you made about whether if they had managed to make a movie in the 90s, it would have doomed it. And I've wondered that myself too, because Ivan continued to make some great movies and a couple that kind of didn't like. And actually, out to be fair, I'm not never 100% sure if he directed or if he produced, but neither here nor there. But I mean, just that 80s tone that was in, particularly in the first movie. I don't know, like you can't keep, you can't, you, that doesn't translate well into the 90s, and I don't know if it would have had the. It's one thing to look back at the movie from '84 and regard it as a classic, but then you bring it into the 90s and or the early 2000s, and I don't know. I'm more comfortable with the idea that Jason, who's a an early 2000s and 2010s director, he gets to put his sensibility into it, because that means that they will actually be well grounded with the audiences now moving forward. And I mean, that's the one thing that I will, no matter what. I mean, because everything about Answer the Call is completely subjective, whether people want to admit that or not. It's completely subjective. The one thing though that I will defend to the death is that that movie came out. It is what it is, and it found its audience. It found people that like Paul Feig's style of comedy and that improvisational, whatever, half-written sort of thing. So it may not have resonated with all longtime fans, but it found its own fans. So that's kind of what Jason did with Afterlife too. And actually, we saw much the same thing. A lot of longtime fans kind of went, "That's not what I was expecting or wanted," sort of thing. And a lot of others went, "That's perfectly fine." And a lot of new fans went, "Wow, this is great. What's the next one?" So,
Yeah, I think
um,
that's the thing, and it's so interesting to me with Answer the Call, because so many people put energy into disliking that movie, and I guess for me, it takes a lot of energy to carry that negative vibe around with me. And the irony of like Ghostbusters 2 is based around negative vibes.
Yeah.
Like let it go. But it really with that Sony deal breaking down the doors and finally getting things going, like if even if you hate it, you still have to acknowledge it that it was the catalyst that brought us to today.
It brought us to today, and it was a clear in retrospect, because at the time we didn't understand it. Like the whole deal that simplified the rights ownership was a bit of a head scratcher. Like even at the time, people were like, "Oh, Dan and Bill and them, they sold out, right? They took their chunk of change and then got out of the way, so whoever it was at the time, Amy Pascal and them, could go make their dumb comedy or whatever." Not realizing that the critical thing there was, and don't get me wrong, a chunk of change up front instead of decades of accounting hassling, especially when the gentlemen are getting up in years. You don't want to leave
Mm-hmm.
your family with accounting hassles. So yeah, big chunk of change, it's there. But the important part in retrospect is we realized that Ghost Core was the big key.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, new Ghostbusters movies would go ahead, but Ivan and Ghost Core would be there to put their input into it, sort of thing. It was not completely taking their hands off the helm, sort of thing. And yeah, now moving forward, it's Ghost Core and currently Jason and all that, and yeah, like it's probably cutting a lot closer than what people prefer than Answer the Call, but it is what it is. It went through Answer the Call. I think in another 5-10 years, I think Sony will probably soften up on trying to quietly ignore Answer the Call, and then we'll try to at least start acknowledging it. And because by that point, yeah, I'm pretty sure somebody's going to sit down and do the math and go, if we put out like a 15th anniversary edition or whatever of Answer the Call, probably sell pretty well. And Sony will go, great, and then and then the process starts again. They'll put that out. If it performs as well as they think, then they go, well, that's an indicator that there's something there that we can keep mining. And I'm not saying I know where that will end up, but it just
No.
means that if you didn't like Answer the Call, well, the main line of movies is continuing. And I mean, the thing is like I've talked about it before. I'm of an age that I still enjoy Real Ghostbusters for what it is, but when it first came out, I aged out of it after the first season. Like I was just on the cusp of hang around and watch cartoons, and then just ended up early teens or whatever. It was time to get my learner's license and
Sure. Yeah.
kiss a
There's your
girl
life to
or
live.
whatever, right? I
Yeah.
wasn't a little kid anymore. So for me, it's like I don't hate Real Ghostbusters, but it's not my bag. But it doesn't interfere with Ghostbusters for me overall that it exists. And more to the point, that it's wildly different than the movies. Instead I've just tried to embrace, what it is, which was cartoons. Sky's the limit. If you can imagine it, the guys can draw it, and that's what they did. And they did some wacky stuff. And it's still to this day, the one thing I point to about Real Ghostbusters is it does the one thing that I hope Ghostbusters is going to head off into now, which is at the very least start mixing up the variety of ghosts that they bust, but maybe even start widening out a bit. Like this fact that they brought back Shandor, even though it's kind of in a offhanded way, it's pretty clear that Shandor trying to tap into Gozer is a magic thing, right? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
magic, maybe magic that you can kind of explain the science to it or whatever. But it's opening up the door that prior to the Ghostbusters in '84, people with willpower and some Latin words or whatever were able to carve open doors to other dimensions and stuff like that, which just kind of opens the door to magic. And I'd actually like to see it go the other way, where maybe we see some other supernatural stuff too, right? Like I would like the best part about Answer the Call, those fist punching things, which don't get me wrong, I was like, yeah, there's a bit of a toyification there and all that, where they're like, we're gonna have to sell a toy, maybe proton punching fists is,
Yeah.
okay, whatevs. Really like to see what that does to, I don't know, a werewolf or something, right? Like, so
Yeah.
Go do that. So yeah, I'm not even sure where this all started, but the one thing I did that did my brain did twig to when we were heading down this was more to the point about the plan for the future. The one thing I again realized after the fact was when they greenlit the next movie and said they wanted it out Christmas next year, and everybody's like, "Wow, that's really quick." I was like, "Yeah," and I'm not a like. Don't get me wrong. I'm pretty sure they're under pressure. Like that's still a short period of time. But I think there's a difference between a stressful "who boy, okay, let's get to it," and a no flipping way. And the difference between that is that they, between wrapping Afterlife and then sitting through the pandemic waiting for it to come out, they put a lot of time humming and hawing and brainstorming and thinking about where they want to go next. That when Sony greenlit it, yes, they still had to sit down and finalize the script and have to get all the production going and all that, but it wasn't a cold start. At the very least, they could sit down. I'm pretty sure they sat down with, well, here's the shape of where we want to go, and here's a couple of set pieces that we dreamt up and wrote down. Let's put it all together, and away we go. So,
Yeah,
sorry,
I
that
think
was me
that's.
rambling, but
Oh no, that's great. I mean, I think that's that's the thing about this franchise is it can spark your imagination in so many ways that I'm just excited to see what they do with it. And I think a lot of care was put into this, and with where things are going, right? We all remember Ecto Force and the animated movie. That who's to say that those ever even got canceled? Those could have just been put the brakes on it. We still like the project we've got going there, but we're going to focus on this main canon story right now, right? We don't
yeah,
even know the animated movie that comes out could be the one they already worked on. It was, talked about pretty openly.
yeah.
So,
We don't know where
um,
that's at, and we don't know how much Ghost Corps wants to try to keep things roughly together. Like, so for example, the comics kind of predate um, Ghost Corps, and Dan and Eric did some really great stuff. But because they were given the sandbox to play in, they ended up way off. There was no real good way to reconcile what they did, except for how they kind of wrapped it up, which was we're just going to wholeheartedly embrace the idea that if the ghosts are from other dimensions, Ghostbusters can be from other dimensions too. And then down the line, if you want to do some hand waving, bring it all together, go for it, sort of thing. So yeah, that's the question, right? Like Dark Horse's comics are coming; those are 100% in line with the comics, supposedly. I'm not sure where that's at now because that kind of got rocked around a bit, but I'm pretty sure Dark Horse is. Well, you know what? How long do licenses last? Dark Horse may have been sitting on a license for most of the time that they got the rights to it. Who knows? But the point being is that yeah, the animation may just be slightly on hold until they solidify where the next movie goes, and they can try to bring, sort of like the animated Tron that they did after Tron Legacy was meant to continue on and not clash with the movie and all that sort of thing. Yeah, if you're going to do this stuff aimed at kids, at least try to keep it a little closer than the real Ghostbusters. And again, we understand why real Ghostbusters was the way it was. Real Ghostbusters had to diverge from the movies just because if you went any other way, um, you know, Deke and them were going to come out, you know, David was going to come out swinging at Goliath on that one. But yeah, it just made it easier to. And at that time, they were like, God, I don't even know if they had dreamed they were going to get a second one done at that point. So they were just more than happy to go, do out whatever you want with the cartoon. We're going
yeah,
to do an episode about the cartoon that references the movies in real life. Yeah, go for it. So
yeah,
Bill
that
Murray is still Bill Murray in the cartoon universe. All right, great, go do that. So
yeah, and that's what made that series so fun. And for me, I really only go back and watch select episodes. I've got the box set just as a collector, but it's one of those things where I've got my favorite episodes, and I probably cycle through those 20 episodes when I want to watch something, just because
yeah,
they took something from folklore and they really wrote a great story around it. It was fun, it was entertaining, right? And that's what I gathered Ecto Force was, except it was worldwide and maybe more focused on traveling. From the brief synopsis we kind of got about, hey, here's where we're going with this, and it's in the future and all that. And but the thing that I love about this so much and all the speculation and this weird stuff is that we can get as fantastical as Dan's original concept was at some point in time, right? It
Yeah.
could be all crazy in outer space, and we get there, and if we get there, we get there. And how crazy would that be for him to say, "Hey, no, we need to ground this in reality," and then eventually get to something as outlandish and over the top as the original concept.
Yeah. I mean, really, the sky's the limit, and that's where I really like having fun, kind of daydreaming about it. Like the animated movie, it actually would be. I don't know. I think it'd be kind of fun to use it to go back as kind of a little bit of a period piece cartoon, post '89 Ghostbusters, and do more of the stuff that they didn't do. Go fight other supernatural things. Hint a bit more about how magic works in this world, like because prior to Ivor Shandor and Afterlife, all we had was Vigo. That was about it, right? So play with that a bit more, and conceivably even start to set the stage for Afterlife, right? I'm not saying end a kid's cartoon on Egon breaking with the team and all that, but you can at least set the stage for his focused attention on the Ivo Shandor cult and what he's learning, and the tension that's starting to build with the team and all that. And like I say, you don't have to take it all the way to the it's falling out and all that. But yes, you can build in little pieces that then feed back into the rest of the lore. Not saying they will, but why not? Because
Well,
that sort of thing, that's for the fans to get more pieces. That the ultimate fan should be able to take everything that's ever made, just like Star Wars, and be able to stick it into a timeline somewhere.
and I think that's what I'm excited about, is that there is this opportunity for Ghost Corps to go through and say, okay, we're going to do this animated series. Well, if you look at, for instance, I would say the closest thing that we might see that's not in the Star Wars universe is Camp Cretaceous from Jurassic World.
Right.
I think that's a really well done series. It's greatly written, and the seasons were pretty concise. They kind of told their story, and if you're able to do that, there's no reason that you couldn't fill in some gaps here and there and have every season cover something different.
Yeah.
And fill different timelines, right? All falling into that same thing if you want. So,
yeah, I think the one advantage that Ghost Corps and Sony has is, and I think that this is another way the pandemic helped a lot because it forced some breathing room, is they get to look around at, and I know this has been talked about a lot before. Ghostbusters is not, how do I put this? Ghostbusters is as big a global phenomena as Star Wars is. Its materials is just not as big. Like it was, that first movie was so big, the entire world knows about Ghostbusters. It's just that they didn't turn it into 9, 10, whatever, umpteen movies and all that, several cartoon series and all that sort of thing. So just because of that, Ghostbusters remains kid brother. Ghostbusters is way bigger than I don't know, a Battlestar Galactica. There's a lot of great genre stuff out there that is still way smaller than Ghostbusters, but Ghostbusters is like the scrappy kid brother to a Star Trek or a Star Wars or what have you, right?
yeah.
And it gets to watch things like Star Wars and Star Trek as they do things and learn from it, right? So like right now, Star Wars is thanks to the whole Disney thing and their approach to the think tank there with Filoni and all that sort of thing. It's a fairly close cut straight line of things that all link together nice and neatly. But Paramount went the other way, and they're dabbling in so many different ways. Like the Lower Decks is a perfect example. Everything that's been made for Star Trek is made by people who love Star Trek, but their approach to it is wildly different from one to another. And they don't horribly clash with one another, but they do make a way wilder quilt than the Star Wars movies make from one another, or shows and all that sort of thing. So a Lower Deck, or I haven't watched any of it yet, but Prodigy and Picard, like they're all very distinct from one another in what they're doing. Again, and fans are, some love it, some hate it, whatever. But I think Sony and Ghost Corps will get to watch Paramount and watch Disney as they play around with these things, and it'll just help guide them into the future with how they can play around with Ghostbusters. I'm pretty sure right now it's informing decisions about, the animated movie, or the animated show, was it landing on Netflix? This is the one problem
Yeah.
about not doing a weekly podcast is
Yeah, your
my,
news isn't like fresh up to date. Yeah, it's
no, I don't hold as much in the registers as much as I used to, but yeah, I guarantee you they're watching all those and using it as a way to help guide. And I think it'll work better too, because the thing is Paramount Star Trek is a monster and Disney is a monster by comparison, whereas Sony's big, but hats off to Ivan. Ghost Corps is a much smaller, much more, not smaller, but let's just say the think tank behind wherever Ghostbusters go is probably a lot smaller and tighter than Disney's doing for Star Wars or the Marvel movies or Paramount's doing for Star Trek. And I think that's
yeah.
going to work in their favor a lot, that a smaller number of clever people and their vision, using the feedback and the stuff they learn from all these other franchises, it's just going to make it that much, it's going to serve them much better, I think, going ahead. So
Yeah, and I think that'll eventually grow that team behind it if they do this the way they're anticipating. But you're right, they do have this small brand. I mean, it's crazy to think that there's people that have never seen the movie, but they know the logo. I mean, I think, and I don't know if this is still accurate because when I read it, it was probably in the early 2000s. But when I was going to school for graphic design, we were talking about logos.
yeah,
The Ghostbusters logo is the second most recognized logo behind their former parent company, Coca-Cola. And if that still holds true today, I mean, everyone knows Ghostbusters. You wear a T-shirt around or a hat, and they all know it
yeah,
and say Ghostbusters. And it's usually the kids, they get all excited to see that logo because it's an immaculate design concept when it was finalized. I mean, it's just hard to beat because it just sticks with you and it makes you. It's not scary. It's approachable, but you know what it's about. So
yeah, exactly. So I. I'm really looking forward to. I don't know that I'll, if I'll ever react to any of the new stuff. I think it's impossible that I'll ever react to any of the new stuff the same way I got hooked on the first one. And let's be honest, I love the second one too, but I love the second one because it was a continuation of the first one. The first movie,
absolutely.
first and foremost, is what caught me. And like I said, Afterlife, I know a lot of people watched the heck out of Afterlife after it came out. I have not had that same impulse. It's a much softer impulse that matches a lot more of other movies I see. I don't watch all the Marvel movies over and over again, but probably 2 or 3 of the old ones every year. I stop and go, I haven't seen that in a while. I'd like to watch that again. Afterlife's going to be in a similar space where once or twice a year I may go, I haven't watched that in a while. I'd like to watch that again, sort of thing. Whereas with the first Ghostbusters, it's kind of like the minute it came out on VHS, I think I watched it every day for a decade. I went to work at a video store, and let's just say if I was working alone, you knew what was going to be on the TV screens, to the point that certain customers grudgingly complained to me about it because they said every time we come into the stores, you're watching that movie. So
Yeah.
I was like, it's not my job to sell you on other stuff. Like, go find a
Yeah.
movie. Ghostbusters is playing.
Yeah, I'm
So,
entertaining myself while I'm here. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
so I don't know that I'll ever reach the viewing numbers that I have on the first one, and I don't. But I'm fully prepared to enjoy the good parts of whatever came out. Answer the Call was, I would have liked to have seen a continuation of the first two, but it didn't work out that way, and I don't hate it. I had
hmm
fun. And
yeah,
and for people's arguments otherwise, I think a lot of the stuff that people charge that movie with, I think they're being a bit deliberately obstinate. Like things like complaining that Answer the Call was too slapsticky. I was like, yeah, as opposed to what the guys, you know, you know, Three Stooges seeing down their way down the stairs after their first ghost to the wacky music and all that. Like they all have their little flavor cues and all that. And take what you like from it. I mean, look at it this way: Answer the Call. I'm doing a lot of defending of Answer the Call here. I'm sure this will end up in fights online, but
That's fine. We're
say
used to
nothing
it.
else about Answer the Call. Answer the Call. People, if nothing else, even if they held like the what the perfect Ghostbusters movie was, and Answer the Call was never going to answer that, they should have at least came out slightly with a certain thrill of getting to see people bust ghosts with Ghostbusters technology in the era of computer generated graphics, to be able to see what that looks like in the era of, and let's be honest, photorealistic computer graphics. Like if they had made one in the 90s, late 90s, would we be watching them try to pull a Lawnmower Man Ghostbusters? That doesn't. I watched Johnny Mnemonic the other day, a movie I genuinely love just because I love the source book. It is not aging well. Every 5 years, it just gets even creepier to watch, sort of thing. And the effects are just a good example. They literally have one shot that looks like they stole it from a toy commercial. And it's supposed to be a shot of Neo Tokyo with a helicopter flying over. And it's a kid with his Amiga, I'm sure, that put that shot together.
And
So, yeah. So the thing is, and even the early 2000s, depending on what they wanted to try to do, it might not have looked great. But to have it made in 2015, everything about it, like, and a possessed mannequin, all that sort of stuff. It's like, great. If nothing else, they should have come out going, that was pretty cool looking. Imagine what they can do if they ever make a follow-up for the first two. So
yeah, and that's really what stuck with me about it is don't watch, if you don't like the movie, don't watch the movie. But do
yeah,
yourself the favor and watch the special features on how that movie was made, because to me, that's some of the most fascinating stuff. Like you went
yeah,
from in '84, they're like, yeah, we're going to put a little bit of light in the wand just so we can get a little light on the actor's face. Great. And then you watch the behind the scenes for 2016, and there's so much natural lighting on the actors while they perform because they had all these LED lights and stuff on there as
yeah.
attachments providing natural light. And then, so when you go to animate something, what's the hardest thing? And I've always complained about the most in animation is the natural lighting around things doesn't always suit well, or the lighting on that doesn't look right. And the lighting in there looks great because the way things were lit in the frame, and then they had to just layer on the composites and everything else for the
Yeah.
effects.
The stuff they did for some of the ghosts, I remember seeing the test shots of the actor wearing the LED light thing, so it cast an unearthly glow on their face, and then digitally matching that up to a wispy half torso that was emanating its own light, and you could see like the skeletal structure underneath, and also casting shadows and all that. And I was like,
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Bernie Wrightson's design on the cab ghost and the way they put it together practically is amazing and will hold up forever. Slimer, in his own way,
Mm-hmm.
is getting dated, but still holds up really, really well. All that stuff is pretty amazing, but they can only go so far, and that's kind of the thing too. Like if they were going to make another one in the '90s, yeah, who knows? I don't know. But like I say, I'm going to see everything that comes out just because I want to see that thing you talked about, which was everybody that loves Ghostbusters has these creative thoughts. It inspires people to come up with cool ideas and stuff like that, and whichever ones they get to pull off for the next movie and the shows and all that. I just want to see that cool idea and just enjoy it and walk away with it. Like, I don't know. It takes a certain amount of personal discipline um, to focus on the things you don't like in movies.
Yeah, it does.
Uh, and I've always had a fairly low threshold for what people might call crappiness. But even then, it's like it takes a lot for me. I'm trying to think of the last movie where it had something that was just so awful. Oh, yes, I do actually.
All right. What is it?
I was watching, for whatever reason, I got really into watching 15-year-old action. So I watched stuff like SWAT and the Italian Job and stuff like that. And that's when I found out, according to Netflix, SWAT has a franchise of 2 movies, and the other one was made in 2010. And I watched it, and I literally got to the third. What the hell are you guys doing? This is the stupidest thing ever, and I punched out. But the point is that it takes atrociously bad writing, or it takes incredibly bad acting or whatever to make me just dislike a movie. So
Yeah. Well, and I've talked to Hank Braxton here recently, and right, he famously made Freddy vs. the Ghostbusters, and then Ghostbusters: A Return, fan films that were at the time huge. Like the amount of time that the community put into helping with effects and things on that's unreal. But he makes a lot of direct to video, home video movies,
yeah,
and he knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows that some of these are going to be doing the best you can with the budget you have, but a lot of people fail to understand what it really takes to complete a motion picture and release it. It's a lot more work than even on the worst stuff available. So the fact that someone can go out there and actually complete that, that's a work of art, right? Regardless of how bad it turns out, but it takes gumption to go and kind of do something like that, especially if you're an independent filmmaker.
The gauntlet just to get a film to the the point of being greenlit, or if you're an independent, getting it to the point of starting to film, so many hurdles. And then just the day-to-day grind of getting it together, then followed by the months of agonizing on how to get the cut and the post-production done the way as best you can. Yeah, nobody that's ever, and let's just be honest, there's a short list of people that when every movie comes out decides that they're going to beak off on it, and I always kind of shake my head because it's like, you should know better how hard it is to make. Nobody, what podcast was, I think it was probably Dana Gould's podcast, and he has people on all the time, and people that make films and television and all that, and he said it several times when they're talking about stuff, nobody sets out to make a bad movie. You may end up with a bad movie, but nobody, the actors, whatever, nobody involved in a movie sets out to make a crappy one. So yeah, that's a good philosophy for the viewer too, to go in and everybody, let's see what they managed to do. That's why the history is filled with movies that got some real like what's a good one here?
The Room is one we always go to, right? The Room spawned its own franchise and spoof movie. I mean, come on.
And there's a perfect example. He never set out to make a crappy movie.
No.
And to be honest, I think the reason it exists and it does the festival circuit and the midnight circuit, and that he had other stuff, it's because people went. You can tell that he wanted to make the movie he wanted to make as best as he could. So yeah, you just sort of go in and roll with it, and you take away the good and celebrate the bad because hey, he did his best. Plan 9 from Outer Space is exactly the same thing. It ends up on the lists of worst movies, and it's, you watch enough movies, you're like, it's nowhere near, it may not even make the top 10 worst movies, because yeah, he really wanted to make that movie. He did the best he could, and for all its faults, it's got some real cool stuff in it too. So I don't know.
Yeah, we watch a lot of bad movies for our show, and it's it makes you appreciate the good ones. But at the same time, the art, there's nothing more beautiful than a terrible movie that someone was well aware of what their budget constraints were, and they were well aware of how their script writing was, and they acknowledge that, and they just roll with it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a hard honesty to come to for a lot of people, is to be able to get there and just accept something for what it's going to be.
Yeah, you can see kind of parallels in that in other places, like the art world, for example, and still remains incredibly snobbish, but at least when it comes to art academics and in the trading world too, some people started to recognize that. So that whole what do they call it? Primitive art. It's a weird way of saying people who were not trained artists decide to make art, and as a result make some amazing things. They may not be the most technically proficient, they may not be the most beautiful, but they went in with an intention, and to the best of their ability translated into a physical form. And if you go watch it that way, if you go look at the painting instead of saying, well, that's a piece of crap or whatever, yeah, it is what it is. And which is weird too, because that's the other thing people forget about art, is like, not all art appeals to everybody. So what's the saying? But I don't know what art is, but I know what I like. Well, yeah, so that's the
Exactly.
same thing. That's why we sit. That's why we live in a world where there are people that actively are Ghostbusters fans and actively are not big fans of the second movie, for example. Sure, didn't resonate with them. So that
Yeah.
okay, that's fine. They know what art is, and it's the first movie. Or in more recent years, there's a lot of people that got introduced with Answer the Call, so it's that for them. And depending on their age and preferences, they go back and look at the old movies, and it's an old movie. Much the same way that in '84, if somebody had tried to make us sit down and watch, the old Bowery Boy movies that Dan Aykroyd was inspired by, we would have went, okay. Or Bob Hope's, Ghost Chaser or Spook Chasers.
Yeah. I mean, there's always something that influences what's going on currently, right?
Yeah,
And I think it's easiest for people to understand that with musicians. Like, if you want to see why an artist you like writes the way they do, you got to learn about what they write or what they listen to.
yeah,
And the same goes for these movies, right? If you understand what influenced Dan, then you can kind of see how that manifested in there. What influenced Ivan, that how that influenced his directorial style. So it's very fascinating. Switching gears a little bit, though, have you
do
jumped
it
on to Spirits Unleashed?
a little bit. My gaming time is kind of limited, um, and I haven't quite sorted out the hurdle of playing with other people. We'll get there eventually. I'm hoping the Christmas break actually provides me with a lot of that time. Like
Yeah,
when my other demands are not demanding, I'm gonna put in a lot more time. But when it came out, Ilphonic kindly sent me a key, so I got to fire it up right away just before it came out. And I played that for so I think I've got 3 or 4 small evenings of play in, but not huge amounts yet.
sure. I'm enjoying it quite a bit. It's a lot of fun for me. It's pretty fresh. It's a good take. I love the video game. And as much as people hated it, um, Sanctum of Slime, I went and
Yeah,
revisited a couple of years ago with my son when I was introducing him to video games. So we played through like the X-Men arcade game because I had a copy of that on my PS3 and some older, co-op 4-player games and such. And Sanctum of Slime's a really fun game with a young audience and 4 people playing in a room like the old school days. So it's a real
yeah,
blast. And I even got a copy of the 2016 Ghostbusters game for $10 or something, and we threw that on and played through it for a little bit the other day, just because it's an easy game to play like that. Where I'm not playing that for Ghostbusters story, I'm playing that for the having a good time with the family or friends or whoever's
yeah,
around. And I think this Spirits Unleashed has done a great job of balancing everything out. I know people are giving it hell for it being buggy and stuff like that, but I mean, again, it's one of those things. If you don't understand the business that's going on behind the scenes of that, you got to
yeah,
cut some people some slack, because there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of deadlines, just like any project, any movie. Like, had it been delayed, you would have been pretty angry, just as upset. So,
yeah.
that's where
You,
you kind of end up with it.
you can see a few things that, um, given their time and resources, ended up being the way it was, or maybe not. It didn't make it through the testing gauntlet, like the feedback gauntlet, which happens in games. Like, you get so close to the thing you're working on that you get used to it. You approach the game that you're making with almost a muscle memory, and then you
Mm-hmm.
hand it off to somebody new, and they start going, "This is weird." So there was a few of those. The number one thing I noticed that hinted to me that, um, they I don't want to say they're rushed. I don't even know. Like I say, I can't even say what would have caused it, whether contractual deadline to date or what. But or the pandemic could have gotten in the way. The end of the pandemic, who knows? But the whole start of the game, where I managed to go through the stuff as it was coming to me in the game, and they were teaching it to me, and they kicked me out into my first battle, and I didn't know how to run. Like, I had to.
Oh yeah.
And there was a bunch of little things in the game that would have been handy to know, that ultimately, and they kind of covered it with, go read the manual. So go up to the second floor, open up the manual, and go through it there. So, you know, and instantly in that first level, I'm picking up the spores, mold, and fungus, and you know you grab it and it's like, this might come in handy later, and I'm like, yes, that would be my guess too, but how? We're still not quite there yet, right? Like, but the game went out. It had most of its hinkiness seemed to be around the really most ambitious part of it, which was making it cross-platform and getting people to play it. I think that was, and even without knowing how to run in my first battle, I was able to go in and instantly was, running and gunning, and even because even though I couldn't quite catch up to everybody else to go take out rifts, I was calming down, bystanders and all that. So the game delivered right out the door. And then, to Ilphonic's credit, they had a roadmap for post-release, and they've been using it to, and improve and update it. And I don't think it went out and any reviewer outright hated it. So I think with Christmas coming, it's going to continue to grow. And yeah, I think it's going to have as much of a life, if not a bit more, than 2009's, because it is what the first one ceased to be after a while, which was a good place for friends to get together and play. I mean, I guess technically you still can on Xbox, but I mean, the more time you give them, the more they're just going to polish it up. Things will get smoother. More people will have jumped the hurdles and be able to convey that to new gamers and all that without people scratching their heads and all that. So what I played of it, I enjoyed too. Oh, that was the other thing. And I know for a fact that this is aim big, team smaller than what you're aiming for, which was the customization of your character.
Oh yeah.
Was great, but I could tell because they wanted you to unlock stuff. The art resources, the art team that they had to make a certain amount of stuff for you to start with at a minimum to make your character, and then still generate a lot of stuff so that as people leveled up, you can unlock stuff and continue to personalize your character. And I'm pretty sure in their roadmap, well, I mean, Halloween proved that in their roadmap, updates will continue to add more stuff in. The one place that they didn't, with all that stuff that they had to do, there was only so much you could put into the faces.
Sure, yeah.
So, for example, I don't hate the customization thing, but for example, the two avatars in the world that in gaming and all that I've made that look the least like me, one is Spirits Unleashed, and the other is the one I had to make so I could play Nintendo Sports with my son on the Switch. Yep. And that one makes perfect sense because everything there is supposed to be a tiny little sprightly character. So it's not great at making 50-year-old Santa Claus looking guys. But again, I'm pretty sure over time, because they even said at one point, they were like, hey, what do you want to see us throw into the game? And a lot of people said, yeah, more variety. Oh, that was the other thing too. Speaking of one of those too close to the game thing, was to go in and they have the changing the shape of the features in the face and all that. There was no go down. There was no thinning, for example, of a nose. You could only increase the size of the nose, which was a little weird because it meant they had a middle of the road nose and no way for people with smaller noses to kind of tweak it down a bit. You could only tweak it up. And that, I think, probably, again, was a bit of a too close in production oversight thing, because it does a lot. Personalizing your character in this game, there is a lot of stuff you can do with it. Even with the stuff not unlocked, you can mix and match and make some pretty keen characters. The epic name, your account name coming in on your tag, that's just a huge thing right there, that you're running around with your name on your tag, sort of thing.
Yeah,
Although I think people with weird names are probably going to get tired of that soon.
yeah, I would think so.
That might be something to add in later.
I
Ilphonic
think
can
in
look into.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things they announced in the last dev stream is that they're gonna have some options around the badge. But I think they've done a really good job with just being pretty open about the game and the dev
Yep.
streams they've doing. And I skipped generations or skipped console generations. I went from a PS3 straight to a Switch, and then just got a PS5 just to when this came out here, and never had a four that level of console really. I mean, they kind of say the Switch is, but Nintendo's doing its own thing as far as what their capabilities are.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of fun playing with it there, and just seeing how open they are with the community out there and talking about it. It's been pretty impressive. And just as you see this brand and franchise grow, I think it's pretty awesome that they're so focused on it. You can tell the people that are making this game love it. The fact that you have to vent your pack is kind of a nice nod to the 2009 game without ever having to say anything about it.
Yeah.
Customizations are fun, and I think it's a pretty nice game to play out there. And I think, to your point, people are going to love playing this in groups. I know here locally, I've got a group of, we just got a Facebook chat of everyone that has the game. And so if you're looking to play with some other players, you can see who's online. And I think once they smooth out some of the cross-platform functionality, it'll be a little bit easier. I think that's the biggest difficulty right now, is just getting everyone in from different platforms. But I think when this game is the most fun when you're playing with 4 of your other friends.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I've had a good time playing with strangers too, but you know how that is playing with games. And, I talk badly against it, but I used to be the same way when I was younger, and just running my mouth when I'd play games on PlayStation 3, like Call of Duty and stuff. And you hear people doing that here, and you're like, oof, used to sound like that. Oh, I'm glad I outgrew that, because I can't believe anyone ever wanted to hear that. But
it's not in the spirit of the game.
No.
If you're going to be a team of Ghostbusters, you that's not what you want. And I've heard a little bit of like the Slimer ghost, or some of the higher, if you unlock up to the higher level ghosts, becomes a lot more frustrating for people to try to fight those ghosts. Whereas if it's a group of 5 of you, is that how it works? Can you have a team and you swap in and out with the ghost? Because like I said, I've never managed to accomplish that yet. All my stuff has been quick play.
So you can choose if you can choose if you have a preference to play as a ghost or a Ghostbuster in their settings. But when I played with the group of 5 friends, y'all just kind of take turns as a ghost. The system will randomly throw you in as a ghost. So the first time I played as a ghost, I wasn't expecting. I'm like, oh, this is a different intro, and I was like, oh, I'm the ghost now. Okay, and I had no idea how.
Yes, which is perfect, because what that means then is that group rules or house rules can apply, which is to say that if somebody has Slimer, the group can say, let's all agree, if you have Slimer and you come up as Ghost, don't do that bullcrap move of this, or try not to be too annoying with that. So if there's anything that is unbalanced or overlooked, that hasn't been a sharp edge that hasn't been chiseled off the Ghost, everybody can just agree to, this is the spirit of the game, no pun intended. Don't do that thing. We'll all have a lot more fun, sort of thing. Whereas, you jump into strangers. I've had ones where I was like, it goes both ways. I've had ones where it's like 4 of us, and it was like a dog pile. Whoever was randomly dragged in as a ghost might have been their first time as the ghost. And I'm pretty sure that's how it felt for the people when I got my first time as a ghost too. Which, by the way, is another example of the whole thing. I ended up getting thrown into the ghost role before the game went, hey, you've come along far enough. Let's go introduce you to Tobin's Spirit Guide and how to play a ghost. It's like, good, because I've had to do it a couple of times already. So
yeah, that's what happened with me. I was playing multiplayer with the friends, and then when I was going through in the story just to unlock all that stuff and kind of learn the ropes, it was like, oh, so there is a tutorial on the ghost. They just have you focus on the ghost busting first. Fair enough.
They tied it into the story, and I do like that they've tried to put some narrative into a multiplayer game, because multiplayer games, real tough place to put in narrative. Co-op games, yes. Single player games, yes. Just multiplayer, not so much.
Yeah.
So I like that they've done that. Although that, in its own right, then turned into, why is Winston possessed? And I'm like, he's what now? Okay,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
okay. Spoiler alert. So, well, actually, same thing. Hey, if you didn't know it, sorry, I've spoiled it for you. But
Yeah. Too late, but yeah, it's kind of fun. So
but I like that they've done that. And actually, going back to our earlier discussion, my question is you have these tertiary characters that they've brought in for the sake of the game, because you can't do it with just Winston and Ray. Will any of that ultimately end up bleeding over into the new movies or the show, for example? A natural place, for example, would be the animated shows.
mm-hmm.
And even if it's just as a throwaway. So if the series is not dealing with the main storyline and is following a different team, can that different team, as they hop around, maybe at some time, can they run into the Sanctum of Slime team, stuff like that? Like, can they start lifting, if they're going to open up the Ghostbusters world into the main timeline? Can you start lifting pieces out and dumping it into from all the other stuff, the stuff that we liked from the previous video games, the new video game, what have you? So
Yeah, I think there's plenty of opportunity for that going forward. But really appreciate your time chatting with me tonight. It's good to see you again, and hopefully everything's going well for you. And how's the
yes,
thinning of the collection been? Are you still kind of parsing down to just what you want?
yeah, it slowed a little bit, and actually, as time goes on, it makes it a little easier for me to kind of to look around at stuff that I knew I had ambition for, and my ambitions have changed. So for the longest time, I kind of went off on I do like collecting the vinyl, and now I'm second guessing the vinyl, and I think that might ultimately turn into a couple of key pieces that I can frame and put on the wall, like the picture disc or
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. And then the rest, again, I might as well. I got to bring it down to the stuff that I have that I enjoy. My time is limited to sit in my den and stare at the Ghostbusters stuff that I love, so I might as well pare it all down. That it's actually going to be a considerable amount of stuff that I ultimately end up getting rid of, which feels weird, but yeah, it might as well go to, as the fandom grows, I might as well relinquish the stuff that I'm just there's no there's no sense in me hoarding this stuff if I'm not going to enjoy it. So it's
Absolutely.
continuing to answer your question. Yeah.
I feel that the same way. So is your son, is he big into the franchise at all, or is he just kind of casual and he knows that you're a big fan?
He knows I'm casual.
Okay.
Um, he went to Afterlife with me when they arranged those preview showings in all the cities. He got to come with me to go see it, and I'm not even sure he had made it all the way through the first one, because I think idly he tried to watch it when I was watching it and was a little too young and not quite digging it or whatever. But then he really came out excited after Afterlife. But as excited as he is, it's still not it's not a real strong strain in his pop culture life. He's
Sure.
got all these other things that he's really digging into. It's actually, to be honest, I'm they kind of Venn diagram over, like he things like the Wednesday series that came out. He was
Okay.
really looking forward to watching that. He does like supernatural things. He does like slightly dark things. He likes to think he's getting away with watching stuff scarier than he than
You think
we
you
think it
should?
is.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
thinks he really wants to, and the only time that clashes is when he asks to see something absolutely horrific, and we're like, absolutely no way are you
Yeah.
watching this yet. Um, so I don't know. I'm not. He kind of enjoys my enjoying it. I guess this is what that comes down to. When he hears references, he'll call them out. Hey, Dad, come here. And he'll run, pause it and run it for me. They made a Ghostbusters reference. Or if we're out and he sees something in the store or whatever, he'll make sure he points it out to me and all that. He enjoys that I enjoy it, and I have no real interest in pushing him into following
Sure.
my lead. He might like I like, to be honest, I'm just as glad that he can find stuff that he finds cool. Glitch Text is a good one. speaking of kind of Ghostbusters adjacent, is he wanted to watch Glitch Techs, and he wanted to watch it with me, and we started watching it, and I'm like, well, this is great. Like, this appeals to me as a Ghostbusters fan, made by a Ghostbusters fan, no less, full of Ghostbuster references. And he doesn't have to worry about that at all. He just enjoyed the show for what it was. So
That's awesome. I think that's one thing about being a parent, thinning the collection. I've got a good collection right now, but at the same time, as a realist, and now I've got 3 kids. My wife just had her first, but my third. And so it's like, just trying to figure out what do I want to keep, because I got all the Fright Feature stuff for my kids, and they play with it occasionally, but they play with Legos or Jurassic World stuff just as much as anything else, right? So they'll get those out once in a while and want me to play. If they're trying to manipulate me, they'll be like, "Hey, Dad, you want to come play Ghostbusters?" But I don't walk in and find them doing that every day, so I'm glad that they have the option if they want. And I'm looking at it like, to your point, there's a whole generation of people that are going to be looking for this stuff, and like, if I've got it sitting in a crate in my garage because I can't display it, is that really the best place for it, or could I get that in someone's hand that wants it? It's really going to have room for it. So
once you have kids, you can't afford, no matter how much you want stuff, you can't afford all of it. You more often than not don't have the space for it all, and you don't have the time to enjoy it. So like, part of my calling is because my collection has been building up since, well, I mean, there's pieces of it that technically go back to shortly after the first movie, particularly the stuff about the real Ghostbusters. Ironically, that's where most of my collecting started, was because real Ghostbusters stuff was around, and stuff about the movies, not so much. Second movie, I guess, is also took off quite a bit with the second one, but it's been kind of all over the place. And me in my 20s may have dreamed that I'd have, like, the glass display case with every fast food toy and box and cup and translite and all that. But at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't know, maybe not. And so it was pretty easy then to just kind of dial it into things like either key pieces, like you can see on the wall behind me, I've got the original art from the old 88 mile per hour cover art. Actually, some of the stuff that he did but never got turned into covers and stuff like that. I like my rarity pieces, and I'd like to hang more of the hangable stuff around if I ever get a chance or the room. But it's overflowing, and I can't enjoy it all at the same time. So I'm like, I may, and I've got other stuff too. Like, once I punched it, because the other thing again about this new movie is I was not in a huge rush to buy stuff related to it. And that was one of the great things about starting to focus my collection, was if a Slimer came out or a Stay Puft came out, well, that was something I'd seriously consider. But when the Fright Features and the new figures came out, I was like, no. I was like, I could pass. But because of that, trying not to get everything. I mean, in a world with Bobby 80s and the gentleman who got the Guinness World Records and all that, or Alex Newborn and all that, people who are and not Alex Newborn, I keep forgetting his name.
There's some prolific collectors out there that really have
some super prolific collectors, and it's like with those guys, I predate those guys. So for me, for a while, I always was like, I will be the Steve Sansweet of Ghostbusters. I will bring it all together, and I will publish the book of it. And that part of me is actually still there and yells all the time. But I'm more, can't be bothered. But in a world with those guys, I'm nowhere near their collection anyways, right? So again, I think I'm happier dialing it down, making room and space for my other hobbies or things I like to collect. My dream now is to just get all this sorted and not have boxes on my big comfy chair, and just be able to come down and sit in the big comfy chair and watch MST3K on the TV, surrounded by all my Ghostbusters stuff. So that's the plan.
I feel the same thing. Well, I mean, we went so long. If you've been a fan, I remember being on Proton charging in the 90s and everything else when you were getting started and talking with Troy on AOL Instant Messenger back in the day. And when new merchandise was hard to come by.
Yeah.
It was like you bought it even if it just had the logo on it. And now it's very refreshing to me to be able to look at something and say, I don't need that in my collection. But I will say I have a t-shirt problem that started with that Target t-shirt that came out in the early 2000s. It was a heather gray t-shirt, and it was a black and white print of the logo on there. And it was like,
yeah.
Well, and I guess Hot Topic came out with those couple of logo shirts and some stickers and just a couple of pieces. Like, it was a very small collection. It was maybe 3 shirts and a hoodie and a couple of stickers.
Yeah.
And, like that being like, oh man, they're making Ghostbuster stuff. And now you've got, you name it, from any creator on Etsy or anything else in the world.
Yeah.
And you're like, oof. I mean, I've probably got 30 Ghostbusters t-shirts to some degree. And it's like, I just look at them all and I'm like, this is madness. This is kind of crazy. Like, maybe I should stop. And so I'm trying to, especially with Black Friday and all the sales going on, it was like, okay, I don't need that shirt just because it's on sale. I don't need it. And then some of them I don't always wear because I'm like, oh, I don't want to wear out the screen print on that and have to throw it away eventually. So you're like, what am I, like, it's madness with t-shirts. I'm like, do I need to just, it's one of those things you're like, okay, now you see why people do quilts and things like that, because you're like, okay, this would make this a functional way for me to keep these things without looking like a nut job when you go into my closet.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there was a year and a half on Proton Charging where I started building a page to keep track of the t-shirts that had been made for Ghostbusters. And that effort ended after a year and a half because, the print on demand took off. So fan t-shirts took off. And the official stuff just started to increase too. Now I have no good sense of how many official shirts are out there, let alone the you go to Ghostbusters News and click on his T Public link, because not only does he his designs, but he tries to keep track of everybody else's. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of. I mean, he's technically curating it. I know there are more Ghostbusters fan T-shirts out there, and he's not even bothering with the ones that he doesn't like. He's just bringing on the ones that he likes the look of and the design of, and that's still hundreds of shirts. Like,
absolutely, yeah.
It's fantastic. It's exactly where I wanted things to be when I started Proton Charging, because Proton Charging started the same way all the other ones in Troy, Ghostbusters HQ and all that started, is because we knew we were fans of the movies. We knew there were other fans, but the internet was not reflecting it. And then slowly over the years, it grew and grew and grew, and kind of hit a plateau. And then the new movies started, and now it's exactly where we all wanted it to be, right? Like, we can, I can turn my back for a year and come back, and the franchise and the fandom and all that stuff is trucking along, which is great. So,
yeah. And to your point, when we were talking earlier, and I'll say this kind of before we wrap up, is, I know a lot of people were worried about the plasma series kind of being on pause right now. And everyone's like, well, this and that. And I'm thinking, Ghost Corps working with Sony and Hasbro has probably said, okay, we kind of see how oversaturated the Star Wars toy line can be and the peg warmers and things like that. So let's not let this stuff hang around too long. And, if you look at NECA, and if you think that if Hasbro would do something like a NECA of the world where they just do an accessory set, right? You don't need to make me necessarily an entire set of Ghostbusters 2 figures, but if you gave me an accessory set, some things like that, there's a lot of opportunity there to fill those things in without bleeding everyone dry. But then again, I'm thankful the series is kind of on pause because I just don't have anywhere to put it. And for me, like with Matty Collector, I would pick and choose based on what I could afford at the time. I was in my 20s when that line started, and it was like, okay, and just trying to get myself steady with my job and everything else. And it was like, I'd miss figures, so I didn't have the whole line. And I'm like, now I'm at a spot where I can probably buy the whole line, let go of some of the other figures I have, older stuff like that. For someone that needs to complete their collection that was in the same set I am, I can kind of make those accommodations now and let people fill their collection. But this is a line I wanted to have, and if this is where it ends for a while, I at least have all the stuff that was released around Afterlife, and I can say, hey, I've had everything there, and I feel pretty good about it. So
I think there are worse things to do with a toy line than make it so that people almost approach it like the movies. So maybe there's a space between movies. Well, maybe there should be a space between the figures too. It
Yeah.
works out better for the toy company because they know the demand will be there. They're not rolling the dice that people will keep buying in numbers. I mean, it's the number one problem with comics. It's the number one problem that IDW had was, you know, after a while, except for peak event ones and stuff like that, like it's hard to keep the numbers increasing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when a new comic comes out every month, some people just kind of like tune out after a while, sort of thing. So,
Well, and
with,
then even comic collecting, you'd run into that issue. Like I have individuals of the IDW series, but for the most part, I would buy the trade paperbacks because the print quality is a little higher and it's easier for me to put on a regular bookcase.
yeah,
I don't got to bag them and board them. And so for me,
exactly.
you got every level of collector out there that wants to do that. And I'm like, I don't want a bunch of comics and bags and boards sitting around forever, but I'll put the key pieces in there. I've got quite a bit of the 88 miles per hour collection as far as some of the variants and those things go, just because that was the first new thing we had for a while when it dropped.
Yeah.
And I have nostalgic ties to that series, even as limited as it was for the time. So it's just kind of fun to see where it's been and where it's going now, and letting like the new fans come in and join in and see where things are going to go, because I think it's ghosts and all this stuff. I mean, if you go on Netflix and you see all the Halloween stuff, there's always going to be a market for this. And it's, if you play your cards right with this brand, I think it's going to be huge. And the older I get, I love collecting these things, but getting to those pieces that you want, right? I love having the same, like some of the stuff I collect would be, some of the Sony cassette decks or tape players from Ghostbusters 2, right, things like that, because then that's multi-purpose for me. I can geek out and have that on the shelf and say, this is basically what they used in the movie. But then if you come by or display at a convention, you can see stuff that you'd recognize from the movie. Yeah. So as opposed to just toys where you're like, I feel like a silly telling my kids, like, this is my toy case. Like, what do you mean this is your toy case? And you're like, I mean, these are made for kids, right? How do you have all these things unopened just behind a glass door and you ask them not to play with that?
One to play with, one to put on a shelf, and 3 as a backup. Like it's, I would much rather, rather than trying to buy everything, I'd rather be able. I think going forward, I'd be much more interested in trying to find more premium stuff to add to my collection, either rarer to find items with the higher price point, or more stuff directly related to the production. Like the stuff I really enjoy the most in my collection is the test silk screening for the Stay Puft bags, marshmallow bags that the props guys did. I have one of those. I have a couple of ILM, a concept sketch, and I have one of the Vigos, the Curlian photography Vigos that they hung on the
nice.
in the second movie that they were processing and looking at and all that. All those, I think going ahead, I'd really, really like to, rather than trying to buy every little thing that comes down the line, just try to find more opportunities to shop less frequently for a higher price value. And because then it's stuff, let's put it this way, you put a lot of thought into getting those 4 prints. Mm-hmm. And those cost me thousands of dollars, and I think possibly top 3 of the stuff I have in my collection. Like if everything else had to go, those would be the last ones going, right? So
absolutely,
I think that's where in a world where Bobby 80s and them is holding it down, I will instead focus my attention on more concept art, or maybe specific real Ghostbusters cell frames and stuff like that, right? I have one that's of Stay Puft. Why not save up the money and try to find that sweet one that has all 4 of the guys, right? Stuff like that. Like, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I feel like that's a predicament. I think just as the fans for the original kind of age and process through, right? I'd say the average Ghostbusters fans anywhere from 35 to 55 based on your age range there. I mean, there's a lot, and that's mostly what I see in a lot of the groups out there doing the charity work, right? And that could just be because you're at a maturity level where you can afford to do that and you have the resources to do that. But as you see people move these things on to the next generation or move these on to the next next part of the fandom, because, you know, there's this legacy here. There's this huge opportunity here to keep these people invested and interested there. And yeah, I'm kind of, after hearing your last talk about it, was like, yeah, I probably need to thin things down to get those in the hands of somebody that can actually appreciate them, than me keeping them in a box in my garage and hoping that I'm going to have room for them someday. And
Right. Yeah.
it's kind of silly.
I mean, there's something Santa Claus is about too, about thinking that at some point, for example, when I finally figure out the process of unloading this stuff, I'll be able to offer up the McDonald's Happy Meal boxes and the toys all in one go.
Yeah.
Stuff that I had to build piecemeal over years early on. And you can still build piecemeal today, but it'd be nice for somebody that really wants that or really loves that, or stuff that even now is kind of harder to find. I remember how, well, let's put it this way. I remember how thrilled I was when I found 2 out of the bag batteries were corroded, those Hardy's sirens, the Ghostbusters siren toys. I was over the moon because I had them. They were these holy grail items. And then I found a set of them all still in the bags. And I was thrilled because they were holy grail items. And now I'm kind of like, eh. But now I know that if I unload those, there's going to be somebody out there that is like, holy grail items, because there's not that many out there. So,
well, and you
they
track
may as
them
well
down.
enjoy them.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. It's like, go through and pick that stuff and make sure you're out there, because I look at this, and I asked you about your son earlier because I'm looking at it like, if my kids don't become huge fans, I don't want my collection to become someone's nightmare or burden later on. Like, right? Why shouldn't I move it ahead of time?
That's right.
Just because you never know what happens, right? Because if they don't want to do that, I don't want someone to resent me because of my collecting. So
I wrote it into my will that my collection gets packed up and shipped off to Eric at Ghost Corps. They can find the space for it. I know
exactly.
I didn't do that.
No, but I mean,
but now that I think about it, that's a really good idea. So my apologies to Eric.
Yeah, sorry, buddy. You're going to have to put this into some sort of a museum. So, well, Chris, I really appreciate your time tonight, and hopefully we'll be able to chat with you again soon, and look forward to seeing your thoughts on things in the future, and hopefully you guys will still be able to throw out an episode a couple times a year maybe, and give us the insight and make us feel, the old school fans still feel like we're all hanging out there together.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to do that.
Awesome. Well, take care, sir. And if you want to give a shout out here and just let everyone know where to find you, hopefully everyone knows who you are. But if someone's just stumbled across from the nonsense movies we watch and they're listening, where can they find you?
Simplest thing is either planetghostbusters.com or protoncharging.com. Both those at any given time point at whatever thing I think will help people find my stuff. You'll find the Crossrip podcast. You'll find the archive Proton Charging. You'll find my social accounts and all that, and you can follow me there and listen to the nonsense I keep spouting every day. So
awesome. Well, take care, and we'll chat with you soon.
These are my dinner guests, the Frog Brothers. Frog Brothers, Frog Brothers. These are my dinner guests, Frog Brothers. Frog Brothers, Frog Brothers. These are my dinner guests, the Frog Brothers. Frog Brothers, Frog Brothers. These are my dinner guests, Frog Brothers. Frog Brothers, Frog Brothers.